What is up, ladies and gents? This is George Bean. I am back now, for the moment, now that my mother is taken care of right now, and this is a spur-of-the-moment review that had come up recently, and as you could guess by the title, in this review, I will be reviewing the 2016 Japanese kaiju film, Shin Godzilla, which was directed by Hideki Anno, with a screenplay by Anno and the special effects directed by Shinji Higuchi, and was also produced and distributed by Toho Studios. It is the overall 31st installment in the 65-year-old Godzilla franchise, and the 29th Godzilla film produced by Toho, and most importantly, it is Toho's third reboot of the overall franchise, thereby launching a fourth era of Godzilla films in what is now being referred to as the Reiwa period. Upon its release in Japanese cinemas on July 29th of 2016, the film had received unanimous acclaim from Japanese critics and fans of the franchise, who praised it as a return to form for the series and title character, but had received mixed reviews from Western critics. Nevertheless, the film ended up grossing over what is the equivalent to $77 million in the Japanese box office, thereby making it the highest grossing live-action Japanese film in 2016 and the highest grossing Godzilla film in Japan. And at the 2016 Japan Academy Prize Festival, it had received 11 nominations and had actually ended up winning 7, including Picture of the Year and Director of the Year. The plot. The film follows a group of politicians and bureaucrats working within the Japanese government when they find themselves dealing with the sudden emergence of a giant, seemingly unstoppable monster that rampages across Japan. Now dubbing the creature Godzilla, they set out to fight through the bureaucratic red tape and do whatever means necessary to find a way to defeat Godzilla for good, or else it will mean the end of all Japan. As it should be noted, Shin Godzilla had marked Toho's return to the Godzilla film franchise after having taken a 12-year hiatus of not making any more films in the series, since the 2004 release of Godzilla Final Wars, which had celebrated the 50th anniversary with a titanic bang. And just as they had promised, a decade would pass and Toho would return to developing a new Godzilla film. While it was something they have had in mind for some time, it was the massive success of the 2014 American reboot by Legendary Pictures that would give Toho the huge momentum to go ahead with their new reboot. It had proven to them that the world was ready for more Godzilla. In many ways, Shin Godzilla is meant to be more or less a reboot of the original 1954 film, taking the basic elements of a sudden giant monster attacking Japan, but updating it into the modern times, such as what would happen if Godzilla had suddenly appeared in today's times for the very first time. So it does not connect in every way to the 1954 film, nor any or all of the previous films that came before it, thereby ignoring all of them and starting over with a new fresh take, much like Batman Begins. It is very much a full-on reboot, meaning that it shows what would happen if Godzilla attacked for the very first time in modern-day Japan. And in this film, there had been no previous records of him up until the film's events. And because of this meant that Godzilla would be brought back to his original antagonistic roots as a destructive force of nature, much like in the original film. But this hasn't been the first time they'd attempted to do that. as in 1984, Toho had also done the same thing with the film titled The Return of Godzilla, which was their overall second time showing the Big G as a full-on villain. And so this was, in effect, their third time. The film was written and directed by Hideaki Anno, who was well known for directing the hugely acclaimed Neon Genesis Evangelion anime series. Toho had approached him knowing that he was a Godzilla fan, but he at first turned it down as he had fallen into another depression at the time. But after some convincing from his friend Shinji Higuchi, Anno eventually signed on to write and direct the film. It was also confirmed that the film would contain suitmation, as had become stable in the Toho films since the original. The suit would also be enhanced with CGI to make the monster more animated in terms of movement. As it should be noted again, is that Godzilla was actually initially created as a metaphor for nuclear weapons in general, and the destruction he brings to Japan in the 1954 film was filmed by director Ishiro Honda to mirror the destruction Japan had experienced from the two atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, which was the only time nuclear weapons were ever used in warfare. Honda himself had stated, "If Godzilla had been a dinosaur or some other animal, he would have been killed by just one cannonball. But if he were equal to an atomic bomb, we wouldn't know what to do. So I took the essentials from an atomic bomb and applied them to Godzilla." While the original film took heavy inspiration from the 1945 atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, Shin Godzilla instead takes direct inspiration from the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, which had also led to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, otherwise also known as the 3/11 disasters. On March 3rd, 2011, most of Japan was hit by an earthquake that was measured 9.0 on the Richter scale, and 20 minutes later, a massive tsunami had then washed over the northeastern coast of Japan, causing more damage and deaths than the actual quake itself. And when you think things couldn't get any worse, the flooding had ended up accidentally causing a nuclear meltdown accident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. In 4 days, three near catastrophic meltdowns at the power plant, but would soon be averted. Thankfully, it was classified as a level 7 incident, on the same level as the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in '86. By comparison, the 1979 Three Mile Island incident was a level 5 incident. I believe what makes this Godzilla film much more special is how it focuses entirely on the political side of the Godzilla attacks, the government's futile attempts to respond to the monster attacks, and their hard-working attempts to contain the disaster. And for those who had lived through the 3/11 disasters, it's positively certain that this film had resonated with the survivors very close to their hearts, much like how the '54 film had resonated closely with those who survived the atomic bombings. Early in the film, when Godzilla first begins his rampage into land, the destruction he wreaks very much mirrors the destruction that was caused by the earthquake and tsunami. And later on, when Godzilla unleashes the full power of his atomic breath, it evokes similarities to the radiation leaks caused by the Fukushima disaster. This film has a socio-political commentary that satires how inept the Japanese government was in their immediate response to the disasters, and even satires TEPCO's corporate negligence in Fukushima's safety precautions for the tsunami hazard, and even their distrusting response to the disaster. So basically, the point of the film is about an entrenched bureaucracy totally failing in the face of an unexpected emergency, and the emergency is really bad. But despite this political satire, it doesn't show the Japanese in a negative light. It does show them in a positive light in their hard-working efforts to stop Godzilla's rampage. Even the Japanese Prime Minister is shown in a positive light. In most other films, a high-powered bureaucrat like him would be depicted as like a villain, but not in this film. He's more of a bureaucrat who is more concerned with protecting the citizens of Japan. And it also brings up how the sudden presence of a giant monster would end up causing some form of turmoil within the international political plane. It's once mentioned that Russia and China wish to put Godzilla under international control, but the US wishes to keep the Godzilla issue related within itself and Japan. This film does bring up underlying themes and subtexts that were very reminiscent of those seen in the '54 film. Later in the film, when all else fails, the United Nations then proposes to Japan a plan to drop a thermonuclear bomb on Godzilla, which would be directly in Tokyo. This badly affects everyone, as the mere thought of the US dropping a third nuclear bomb on Japan is too horrifying, which is understandable given how it has been 70 years since 2 atomic bombs were dropped there, and how it had affected the general population. Some are outraged at it, while others believe it to be their best chance. And also that after hopefully the blast successfully kills Godzilla, Japan will be given special international help from the UN coalition in the rebuilding efforts. But that also means that Japan will be put in the UN, under the UN's control. So you certainly get the sense that the very existence of Japan really is under threat of being wiped out from existence. And it is not just Godzilla who poses that threat, but also international politics. And in terms of raising the stakes, it really does raise the stakes much more higher when Tokyo is further under threat of not only Godzilla rampaging through it, but also a nuclear bomb destroying it in an instant flash of light. But thankfully, our protagonists managed to beg the US, with the help of France, to delay the nuking, and to give them time to commence with their freezing plan, in which they attempt to inject a large amount of coagulant into Godzilla, which would freeze his blood system, and thereby immobilize him. Our team of heroes who attempt to freeze G are obviously inspired by the Fukushima 50, the very people who had chosen to stay at the power plant and tried to contain the meltdowns, even when they knew they were against direct orders from TEPCO. And thanks to their plan being successful, they also managed to stop the UN from launching the nuclear bomb on Tokyo, thereby saving Tokyo from total annihilation. The film actually ends on a hopeful note, as despite the destruction caused by Godzilla's rampage, Japan plans to rebuild from the rubble, something they had done similarly in the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and similarly in the aftermath of the 3/11 disasters. It is stated that the countdown to the UN nuking Tokyo had been suspended with only 1 hour, with only a mere 3,526 seconds left, but maintain that if Godzilla ever reawakens, the countdown will resume as planned, and the UN will launch a nuclear bomb. and so Japan must do what they can to ensure that Godzilla never reawakens from his frozen hibernation. So the film does end on a cautionary note, in that even though Godzilla has been defeated, the sheer threat of him still potentially looms over Japan, and it does kind of leave the film open for a potential sequel. And one thing to mention is how this film also pays loving homage to the 1954 film and the overall series with references, both small, big and small. For sound effects, they use different variations of Godzilla's trademark roar and even his stomping footsteps. And even when the movie actually starts with the Toho logo and main title, it very much homages how the logos was similarly done in the original. So this film is a big fat love letter to the original in almost every way possible. And as for a few other eye-winking references, there's a scene where the protagonists are given information which reveals that a disgraced anti-nuclear zoology professor named Goro Maki had been studying mutations caused by radioactive contamination and theorized the appearance of the creature, but he was disbelieved by his scientific inner circles and was ousted. And so, feeling betrayed and angry at Japan for allowing his wife to die from radiation poisoning, it is suggested that Maki had chosen to allow the creature to rampage. I bring this up because, fun fact, the name of the zoologist, Goro Maki, is a reference to the protagonist in 1984's The Return of Godzilla, a reporter who first discovers Godzilla's resurfacing in that film. And it's mentioned that the island that Goro Maki is from is called Odo Island, and a reference to the 54 film which featured a couple scenes set on Odo Island, where Godzilla first begins his rampage, and where an islander there first calls him Godzilla. And there's also a nice little quick moment when the protagonist Rando Yaguchi reads the Maki files and discovers that Maki had named the creature Gojira and also Godzilla, which is actually a code word coined by the Department of Energy. I really did love how it reveals the names, and it uses both of them, not just one of them. And what I also like is how they explain that the Godzilla or Gojira in Japanese tradition means God incarnate. I like that little fact. It reinforces the concept that Godzilla is sort of like a godlike deity given his invincibility and abilities such as his atomic breath. And something I had also noticed in the Godzilla films is that there's almost something I'd also noticed in which they when they uncover evidence of the unregulated dumping of radioactive containers into the Pacific Ocean, it's mentioned that this dumping had happened 60 years ago, quote unquote, meaning that it had occurred sometime during the 1950s. Clearly another eye-winking reference to the fact that Godzilla had debuted in his first film in the year 1954, and it was also around that the same time when the US was secretly testing hydrogen bombs in the South Pacific. And to also mention is that when this film was given a limited theatrical release here in the US, it was going to be marketed as Godzilla Resurgence, but that was abandoned, most likely because of a similarly titled film, Independence Day Resurgence, which was being released just a month prior to this film's release. And in case you are wondering what the title Shin Godzilla is to mean, it is said that the word Shin in Japanese means new, true, God, and apparently in some cases evolved. So in a way you could say you could call this movie New Godzilla, True Godzilla, or in some cases, Godzilla Evolved. I just wanted to say first now, for me, uh, I have been a bit of a Godzilla fan for most of my life. My very first Godzilla film was, believe it or not, the 1998 version. Uh, that was the movie that introduced me to Godzilla, the character in the franchise. But it wasn't until the 2014 American reboot when I got more into Godzilla and am now more of a fan. I have some things Godzilla. I am a huge fan of Godzilla now. I own a couple of the movies, including the original and Shin, and even the 2014 version. And funnily enough, too, I own a magazine from Life, a Life magazine issue of just recently at my local Walmart, and I I even have a poster for the 2014 film, but it's hanging on my wall, and I even own a little action figure of Godzilla. He looks so cool here. It just looks great here. I love this little guy. He looks so cool here. It really is. I like this. I'm glad to have gotten into Godzilla. I'm a big fan. So with that said, I had just gotten around to purchasing this on DVD just like a week ago, and I watched it. So I will say that wow, was it this amazing? I had fell in love with Shin Godzilla. I happen to agree with everyone else. Shin Godzilla may possibly be the best Godzilla film in recent years. What I had ended up loving about this film was how it focused more on the political side. It shows how the bureaucrats have to go through so much red tape just to get something done. There's this giant monster rampaging through the city, destroying everything in its path, causing mass civilian casualties. And these suited bureaucrats are sitting in their high-rise offices having meetings to figure out what to do next. In all honesty, I wish more monster movies or disaster movies would focus more on the authority side or the political side. Maybe that is just me there. When I watched this film, I did not expect how Kubrick-esque this film actually turned out to be. It ends up taking a strange love-esque satirical approach and showing the higher-upper bureaucrats to be inept and wrong when it comes to the disaster. They try to reassure themselves, and even the Prime Minister tries to reassure the public that everything will be fine and that the creature will not come ashore, only to then be proven horribly wrong just 2 seconds later, when it turns out that the creature had in fact made landfall and is tearing its way through the city streets. There's this one really funny scene early in the film when they first realize that a giant aquatic creature is causing disruptions in the water. They talk to 3 science experts to try to give their opinion as to what it is that the creature is, but they instead do nothing, refusing to actually identify or give some special info as to what it is, to identify the creature, because they're more concerned for their credibility as scientists. They fear if they do say anything and it turns out wrong, they will lose credibility. What makes this scene great is that it is actually taken from something that actually happened during the Fukushima disaster. The Prime Minister asked three experts to hypothesize what will happen next, but they couldn't give clear answers, and they were also proven wrong when the hydrogen explosions happened, something which they confidently assured would not happen, only to then be proven wrong 3 times. And yes, I did find the human characters to be interesting too. With the main character Rando Yaguchi, we are given a chance to sympathize with him for his plights in trying to find a way to stop Godzilla. What is interesting about this Godzilla is that, unlike in the original film where he is a prehistoric dinosaur-like creature that had been awoken and deformed by H-bomb tests, this Godzilla is more of an ever-evolving life form. It started off tadpole-like, and that prolonged exposure to dumped nuclear containers had caused it to mutate and evolve in shape and size in rapid succession in any new environment it introduces itself into. But as it progressively evolves, it does slowly begin to turn more into the pose he is more known by. Like, when it goes, like, it doesn't take on its actual Godzilla look until its third form. Like, actually it's a fourth form, when he looks more like his classic appearance. And it's only 47 minutes in is when he actually first appears in his fourth form. And not only that, but the scientists also discovered that he can asexually propagate via a single organism growth. And so in a matter similar to the Thing, he will keep on growing and evolving endlessly, possibly even be able to sprout wings and fly, and thus rapidly colonize the whole planet. This thereby makes Godzilla even more of a planet-killing threat in this film. In a weird way, his self-evolving, self-reproducing abilities kinda seem similar to Hedorah and Destoroyah, both of whom have very similar origins and abilities. And fun fact, for 3 years, this film had held the record for the tallest Godzilla at the time, at a whopping 389 feet in size, in comparison to Godzilla being 355 feet in the 2014 film. But now, in the new film, Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla is said to now be 393 feet tall. I mean, geez, if they make him any larger, he might end up having a gravitational pull. But I love the shot of him rampaging into Tokyo. We have this high overview shot of the Tokyo skyscrapers with Godzilla in the background, and somehow he causes a power blackout in the city, and all the lights in the buildings around him suddenly go out and it becomes near dark, helped further by a piece of the score titled "Defeat is no option." It actually gives the scene a sort of apocalyptic look to it. But one scene I really want to talk about, and possibly my favorite scene in this film, is the atomic breath scene. When Godzilla rampages into Tokyo, the US military arrives to help with the use of 3 B-2 stealth bombers, and they drop MOP bombs on his back, injuring him badly. And it almost seems like it is working. But then Godzilla, more pissed off now, leans down and his dorsal fins start glowing bright purple. And that is when he unleashes his atomic breath, which is, like, in this one film, his atomic breath is, like, first, like, him spewing out huge flames that just create a fireball that engulfs the city, before then turning into, like, this purple bright purple, the shaft of laser light, that slices through everything that touches, like a hot knife through butter. And he can also shoot the lasers out of his dorsal fins out of his back. And this ends up destroying all three of the B-2 bombers before he resorts to using his atomic breath to further annihilate the city more, which is pretty cool. And we are given those beautiful shots of Godzilla unleashing his fiery breath on the city as it is completely engulfed in the hellish fire. It is really beautiful to watch, and also feels very apocalyptic as well too. That one shot in the film, also mirrors a similar shot in the 54 film, with Godzilla walking across a, a Tokyo engulfed in fires. It's very eerily similar. And with this whole atomic breath scene is helped further by this one lovely piece of the score titled Who Will Know, which can be interpreted as being Godzilla's inner voice, in which he sees himself as a lost animal walking in an alien world and having a strong will to survive against the overwhelming odds. It is a very beautifully done music piece in this scene, and possibly the best piece in the entire music score for this film. But in discussing the scenes focused on Godzilla, and most of all the action scenes, they're really the best things in the film, in the way it brings the Big Chi back to his more destructive antagonistic roots. So seeing him rampaging through Japan feels like a refreshing thing to watch in a Godzilla film, other than having to battle another monster in the city. And yeah, I also really love the action scenes in this film. Of course, it is yet another film in which has the Japan Self-Defense Force combating Godzilla. But the whole Godzilla versus military thing has become a famous staple mark for the franchise. But it is justified more here because it is a reboot. This shows their first time having to combat a giant monster, and it is just then do they realize that their weapons are ineffective against it, and thus realize how futile their efforts really are. I love the one bit where the fighter jets then drop bunker buster bombs on the monster, but we are shown the bombs just bouncing off of his skin. It shows just how hard-shelled and tough his skin really is, that anything that whatever bombs they throw at him, they just bounce off of him. And I also do like that the ending feels much more hopeful than in the 54 film. This film ends with the note that Japan can still prevail and rebuild from the rubble. And after having gone through everything in the film, the ending really feels like a relief and gives you a sense of hope for the characters and overall Japan. Now, the film was hugely successful in that it it was even actually enough to justify a sequel. And now there has been talks of making a Shin Godzilla 2, and Ono had not ruled out the possibility, but had claimed that it is unlikely to happen until at least after 2021, after Toho's deal with Legendary Pictures is finished. But despite this, in May 2018, Toho's chief Godzilla officer, Keiichi Ota, had revealed in an interview that a Shin Godzilla 2 may or likely not happen soon, but did reveal plans that he has in mind for what he calls a world of Godzilla, a shared cinematic universe between Godzilla and the other Toho monsters, which he desires to develop after 2021. Oda had cited the Marvel Cinematic Universe as an influence for his plans, with a plan to release a new film every 1 to 2 years, whether it be a Godzilla film, or a Mothra film, or even a King Ghidorah film, possibly culminating with an Avengers-level crossover event. But one last thing to mention is that on the DVD, the film is dubbed in both the original Japanese language and in the English dubbing. And to be honest, I prefer watching this film in its Japanese dub with the English subtitles. There's just something about the English dub that feels off to me. The words being spoken doesn't flow well with the movement of their mouths, and it's not helped further when I am aware that this film was filmed and acted in Japanese. So yeah, I prefer to watch Shin Godzilla in Japanese as it was filmed. I'm willing to take my chances with the subtitles. In fact, I've always loved subtitles. It's something I've always liked when watching movies. But overall, I am happily willing to give Shin Godzilla a rating of 8 stars out of 10 because Shin Godzilla is one of the most unique and most interesting entries to have ever come out of this 65-year-old franchise. Toho, with the help of a director who was a die-hard fan, had successfully introduced Godzilla in a way that feels new and fresh, and yet also stays faithful to the franchise and mythos, and never forgets the character's roots. And finally, it may actually be the best Godzilla film since the original, and it also, honestly, may be a much better reboot than the 2014 film was. I would definitely recommend Shin Godzilla, especially if you are a die-hard Godzilla fan, or also a fan of kaiju films in general. I can promise you that you will not be disappointed in it. And if you want to watch a Godzilla film that actually adheres to what he was originally intended, then this film might be your number one choice to check out. So thank you for watching, ladies and gents. And so as to give y'all a heads up, I am also planning to review the original 1954 film and the 2014 legendary reboot as well. I had really wanted to do Shin first, because I was so anxious about it that I felt I had to do that first. So, expect the future reviews for these two films in the future. So thanks for watching, and until then, long live the king, long live the king of the monsters. Peace.